but it was kind of goes back to like, you could be data collecting and all these different methods and watching the wind and watching all this other stuff. But like, hey, find a guy that's been and the guy on the ground that's lives there.
Right.
Real good dude to talk to. And that's like, right, business and like anything. There's always somebody that has the key to it that is kind of outside of the scope of your normal influence.
Yeah. Well, when you were sitting there talking about like, breaking it down, oh, you do this, then you do this, and like, oh, what's next? Like, I'm literally in my head sitting there thinking about football,
right,
and going, okay, well, I watched tape, and I remember on 3rd and long, 60% of the time they were in this
yes,
deep, and then they were in this cut, and then this was the secondary rotation, and this was the coverage they were in, and so then I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
like literally, it's the exact same thing.
It's the exact. That's like, why when we first started talking about it, when I was like, man, once you start getting into the strategy and the flow chart of that, it becomes like really addictive, because you're like, you could start kind of predicting the scenario based on percentages and patterning, and who's noticing what they call, like, snipers are just trained observers with weaponized math.
That makes sense.
Who's watching the patterning of actions, and you start predicting things that are occurring. Which is best football coaches do it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like, we talked about I think the first time I ever met you is like, okay, I remember when I was like a 19, 20-year-old young coach, and I was in a room with all these guys who had been coaching for 30 years. And I just realized how stupid I was, right? Like, everything they said, I was, oh, okay. And right. It would, one bit of information would open this wormhole.
Yes.
To a million other pieces of information. And then you had to go learn each one of those, and each one of those opened another wormhole. And it, to the point where now it's 30 years later, and now I still could learn a million things, but at least, now people would be like, hey, what would you do here? What would you do here? That's like where I am with hunting, right? At 55. It's like
everything is open, kind of.
All you guys that I'm around that have been doing this for 30, 40 years. And I'm like, I'm the biggest idiot in the free world.
I feel it all the time. The interesting part about, I guess, like hunting or, business, football, whatever, it's almost like a deduction mentality is what kind of, because I would say on a football field, there's a million plays you could run.
Sure. But they're not all going to work.
Right. So you start going, hold on, these 70% of these plays are not going to work. Good. I only have 30% of them to look at now.
Yeah.
And then based on the horses that I have, all right, well, now it's 10%. And then based on the scenario we're in currently, now it's 5%. All right, I'll gamble on 5 and see how it shakes out. But that's, as my hunting has gotten better, that's what I think I could cut out all the other stuff faster. And that has been huge. Now, anything can happen, of course, but that is the biggest piece of the puzzle, I think, is just knowing what's not a good, and that's for business too. It's marketing, everything. This is a bad idea. Don't do it. Like, don't spend money on it, because it's all overhead, right?
I just had that conversation with like a group of one of my clients this morning, right? 4 doctors who are literally, they're $3 million just to get the doors open.
Sure.
But they're looking at, a $600,000 piece of technology. And a couple of them are really excited about this, like super juiced about it. And it's a great piece of technology, but I'm like, that's a 6-month piece of technology, right? You don't need, you don't need it when the doors, like, you need to phase into that. Like,
right.
You don't need to put that capital out front right away, because of what happens in the beginning. You're not going to be able to ramp that phase of the business up for 6 months anyway.
So why pay?
For it now? Like,
sure. And so that just deduction mindset, you're like, this is how the reduced possession model, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, is that how you got? So I'm always we talked about this before, but I'm interested with, when you look at SORINEX, what it was when your dad started it, and what he did with it, and then how you took that and transitioned it to this model into colleges and NFL teams. What was your, from a thought process standpoint, like, how did you go there with your thought process, and then how did that follow from an execution standpoint?
Well, it's a good question. When people don't maybe realize is, like, the clientele level has always been there. If you broke it down like strength conditioning, there's like intensity and there's volume, right? We always had the intensity, i.e., University of Tennessee was purchasing from us. The football team was purchasing a full weight room, custom weight room in 1985, 1988, stuff like that.
So you were putting stuff into big universities that early.
So the intensity was there.
Okay.
And the 1990s Chicago Bulls, Jordan was, when they were the Bulls, that was our stuff.
Okay.
So we were there. It was just the volume wasn't there. So we were kind of like this secret, this like mom and pop husband, or it'd be a son and pop kind of unknown. We would do a few big jobs a year, some local folks, and we were just kind of moving on with our lives. Right. That was where it was. And I think maybe what I pushed was volume and of like, how do you scale this? And what I realized was our story was unique. Our branding in a way was unique, but we didn't have the opportunity to tell the story. So it was, how do we expose more of the world to who we are, not be different or create something different, or like, let's create this image or this, like, no, I think what we're doing is pretty good. Just more people need to know about it. So that was where actually taking legitimate marketing efforts, branding efforts, and exposing like more of the world to what we were doing.
And then what time when was that? Like late 90s?
I got there in 1999.
Okay.
So first I came there as just Pops' helper. He'd been holding the reins for 19 years by himself,
right,
and just needed somebody to help. So initially it was just me helping out. But what I quickly found, because I was training for attempting to make a 2000 Olympic team and a 2004 Olympic team in the hammer, I was training. So training was my life. So that really worked really well, because my goal was human performance. So I was kind of in a way on the same side of the table as our major customers.
Yeah.
So I was trying to unlock the keys to it, but I also had a hand on the wheel that could actually create the tools that unlock the keys. So I was learning for my own voyage. I was kind of like a sailor that was also building boats
and selling them
right, to other sailors who were also trying to explore the world.
So then you could talk to them on your level, like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I mean, relationally, it's just like you could just walk in and kind of fit together, right?
Right. And there's, as you well know, in the coaching and strength world, there's very few times when someone, it's kind of like, I hate to say man code, it's not man code, it's strength code. If someone walks into your weight room and they're an athlete who has dyed in the wool, like they are training, not working out every once in a while, but like they're training for a purpose, and they're in town and they ask to train at your facility, kind of ethics are you don't turn them down.
Right.
Like that's not a thing. Like if you're training for an Olympics or a powerlifting meet or whatever, and you go into town and, hey coach, would you mind if I stop by? I need to get a training session in, blah, 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 blah. They always say yes, partly because they're out of respect. They would want the same courtesy, but also they want to see a high level person. What are they doing?
Yeah.
And then, so when I would walk in and I would be either moving some decent weight or I was training for something, I would go and start training. The coach would walk over and watch what I'm doing a technique wise, or then I would walk over to him and start asking him questions, or their kids would be training and I'd get to watch. So there's become this, the knowledge was free flowing back and forth. And it wasn't, I'm a purveyor of this product I want to sell you. It was, I could help you if you need it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I have to compete tomorrow. So I need to get a training session in. Do you mind? And of course, now we're on the same page. The coaches and I, we would get talking training. They'd come and work. Like, hey, let me get a session in with you. Sweet. Let's squat. And we would lift. And then afterwards it's, hey, let's go out and get something to eat and go talk training. And then what I was doing unknowingly, I was learning everything in the industry that needed to be changed from the voices who wanted it changed. And I don't believe anyone else in the industry was doing that. They were trying to say, I have this product, come buy it.
Yeah.
And I was with the coaches and trying to solve my own problems in training because I was undersized as a professional thrower. So I was having to figure, like, how do I eke this extra meter out of this throw? And it was through advanced training techniques or gear. And so then I was always trying to make just what will make me throw further. Well, I'm in a power sport, so if it works for me, it's probably going to work for a university of wherever. And I was getting the feedback. So I think inadvertently I took a drastically different approach to the business that all my competitors did.
Which is now, honestly, in today's market, you see so many people doing that.
Sure.
because they realize that people want authenticity.
It's the X
They
factor.
don't want to be sold. They want to buy a product that they relate to, that they
Right.
connect with, and that's authentic.
Correct. And for years, I would hear our customer base fight for us, and they're like, but you guys actually train. Like they go,
Yeah.
you actually know what you're doing, because I've seen you squat 500 pounds in my facility. I know you train. You're about this. And I had one coach literally grab my hand and he pointed at my calluses. He's like, you see those? That's why I'm buying from you. He's like, if a sales guy walks into my place and he doesn't have
got
calluses,
soft hands,
I'm not listening.
Yeah.
And so it would just so perfectly happen. It was a God thing that I happened to be in that phase of my life when I got into the business world. And it was like I was shot out onto the ramp, off the ramp onto the highway of the business world at the perfect time. And so that was a key piece. And then the people that I hired and brought into the fold were all those same people. Like Paul Beckwith worked for me 20 something years ago.
Right.
And, you know, he was doing the same thing, trying to get in the NFL. Like, so everyone around us were like, we're about this. And also we're pretty good at building stuff. We're good at listening to the customer and going, yeah, I agree. Let's figure out this. Let's solve this problem. Let's cut this time down on your training, or add efficiency or accountability or safety to the room in the facility. And so we were able to be extremely agile during those times. And so that's building that. And then our customer base became our marketing. And we tried all the marketing things. You know, we would do like 1-page ads and this thing. And we would like, you know, it's like $5,000 was like so much money to us back then. It's like, it's only $5,000 to do it in the AFCA thing. And I'd do it and like, I don't know if anything would happen. It was, you know, no offense to those guys, but we would run a page ad and spend all this time. I had in the marketing department. So I'm like trying to hobble these things together. But I realized what worked was me going out there and living the training lifestyle, which is what I was already doing. But this just gave me gas to follow my dreams and go, okay, then I'm going to just try to do this. And if you like it and you associate with it, cool. And then we built a network of people that are, especially a lot of younger coaches that were kind of my age. There were assistants and things like that. They would come out and train with me. And we became friends. And then years later,
they're the head strength coach
at Georgia.
Yeah.
You know, they're the head strength coach at so-and-so. And then people come in and, you know, you know, I've had those coaches go, man, our ties go back 20 something years. And I know everything about your company. And I've done installs. I've been all like, you're our guys, period, end of story. So it's hard because like the scalability, but also the replicatability of that model is really hard. It's almost like saying you want to be a better football player, like pick better parents.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like,
right.
In a way, it's kind of like, yeah, you kind of should have done the work 25 years ago. I kind of happened to have, you know, I didn't know it at the time.
Right. You were doing it. You were just doing what you do, but the two things ran a parallel track.
They did. Now, had I been training for that and been a refrigerator salesman, that wouldn't have applied.
Right.
Right. And so I feel so blessed that it just so happened that my passion, my gifting, and my position all kind of Venn diagram together. And then we were able to do something with it. Cause I look in 100, kind of that deduction model, 100 other ways of combinations that wouldn't have worked. You know, had I been a business guy, a heavy business guy getting into the strength world, it wouldn't have played.
You would have been doing all of it through analytics and trying to figure out
stuff, right?
Yeah. And what's going to sell.
And there's people that have done it, that have done extremely well, that have already made their money, sold their company, and probably doing much better than I am. But I'm not that smart when it comes to business, but I understand what I would want. And I understand my customer base. And so I go, is this how I would want to be treated as a customer? Is this what I would want to see happen in my weight room? Is this, and if it is, if it passed that smell test, we go with it.
Yeah.
You know,
when you said,
then I hire someone that does all the profit and loss stuff, the smart people.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do. Right. No, I always say a man's greatest strength is to know his weakness.
Sure.
Right. And then make sure that you figure out somebody that can help you do that.
That was one of the bigger spikes, is when we started hiring out those positions, because man, I'm bad at it. And Pops isn't good at it. Like the hard part is Pops and I are so similar in so many ways. And when you have two lions, like great, but all the stuff that lions aren't good at are total exposures.
Yeah.
So once we learned like, hey, let go a little bit, trust, hire the people in those places, and then you could be a lion, like, because then you're there, because you don't have to sometimes be a lamb.
Well, I can't remember. I'm terrible at remembering what I read or who wrote it or whatever. But I was reading, it was an article that was a profile on what they called visionaries, right? Which I would put you in that category, right? And it has this kind of connotation when people hear the word visionary, right? It kind of has this grand connotation. But when you really get down to look and say, what is that? Right? It's a person who can see what other people can't see. And
white space that's still there.
Yeah. And they tend to be very creative in nature. They are also very disciplined, right? So there's kind of this confluence of these two things that a lot of people don't have. But what happens with them is they have amazing ideas. They are really good at getting something going, right? And they get it to a certain point because of their vision. But then when it starts to rely on execution and structure, if they're not smart enough to bring somebody in that's good at that, that's when everything just stagnates. And then they start to run into problems because they're, in a lot of situations, their ego's too big to recognize or to say, that's not something I can do.
Right. Because they generally have such high passion, and passion is an emotional response. Right?
Correct.
And so they're like, but this is what I feel it needs to be. And you're like, and I've had to look back. I'm like, oh, so dumb. Like,
and there's some guy sitting across from the table saying, no, that's not the right way to execute this. Like, we want to give you what you want, but that's not the way to get there.
Right. And what I had to start looking at from a business side, it's kind of funny. The business portion of it, I have no quantifiable goals necessarily. Like little cute goals. Hey, I'd like to do this quarter. Like, okay, fine. And still, I don't care. The goal is, how do we make SORINEX profitable and sustainable for as long a period of time? And unpacking that means, do we get to keep doing this? That's all that means. That's all it means. People are like, what are your goals? I'm like, I want to be able to have me and people that align with me somewhat emotionally get to do this, put food on their table, and get to enjoy this lifestyle as long as possible. That's the business goal. That's it. So if things have to happen in the shop and overhead
to get you there,
to get us there,
right,
the goal is profitable, i.e. it stands on its own, and I don't have to keep dumping money into it, because there's phases of that. But, you're like, but we're almost. So if it could spin on its own axis and do it for a long time, there you go. Like, then maybe I'm just a simpleton. Maybe it should be way more complex than that. But in my opinion, I really love what we have going on, and the people who work there, I love that they have that opportunity to do it. So it's like, how do we keep this party going and do good work for people who want what we do, and do it as long as possible? And so everything else is just X's and O's to get there, right? How do we have a winning season? You don't really care as long as there's a whole bunch of W's, right? Like,
that's right.
And then
the ones who care are the ones who worried about their ego because they got there a certain way versus just getting there.
And so sometimes we've had to, whether it's been marketing and I mean, my gosh, the COO position of it is so, like, the operations, holy cow, like it's mind boggling,
especially for what you do, right? With all that production and installation.
There's certain days you're like, hey, this is looking good, we're about to dump this cash into a marketing thing, and you're like, oh, just kidding, the sewer went out and we got to buy a new pump for $55,000 and we have to do it today. And you're like, well, there was that.
Go buy the pump.
Go buy the pump, right? It's just like, that's not something you're like, in my business plan, I'm going to make sure that we have the wastewater thing and the detention ponds. You're like, what? But those are the things that will screw you if you don't have figured out or a plan in place and someone decisively being able to, like, call the shot on that.
Yeah.
And so, like, my skill is generally more of a soft skill, the soft skills and the feeling of the whole thing. And then I have people in place that are like a bit divorced from the feelings, and their goal is make sure my feelings and my dreams, like, shake out. Like, that they add up.
I mean, a lot of people that are building a business run into that situation. So, like, how did you find those people? Like, how did you know that person's qualified to do something that I know I'm not qualified to do? Boy, how did you vet that? And then how did you get the right people?
Vetting of that is hard. It's something that I'm generally pretty trusting of people to an extent. to like, then if it's like in my wheelhouse, then it's like, whoa, I hold on to that kind of tightly, because there's been not great partners. There's been not great employees. Like, that's all the thing. You've been in business for 43 years.
You're going to have that.
You've had blood, right? Yeah. And in one case, we had a fella that was working for us in production, kind of tooling up our shop, younger guy, was doing a great job. And I was like, man, we're really impressed with him. Like, where the heck did you learn to do all this? You're a young guy. He's like, oh, my dad, he's a freaking monster. Like, really? He's like, yeah, that cat could do anything. It's like, So we took him hunting. Took both of the father-son hunting, just hang out, just wanted to kind of like ask questions. Hey, you want to go on a hunting trip? Yeah, sure, I'll hang out. And then after a while, you start talking and realizing some people have some pretty amazing skill sets. First got him on as a helping us do online marketing, because he knew a ton about keywords and Google ads and all the other stuff. And we paid him $300 a week. That was his budget.
You're kidding.
$300.
That was his budget. $300 a week for Google ads.
For Google ads.
When was this?
10 years, 12 years, 11 years.
Okay.
So it's like, that's all we had.
Yeah.
Like, this is what you got. And he's just like, all right. And which is like, nothing, right?
No, I was going to say, I've got some clients that spend like 30 grand a month on Google ads.
Of course.
Like insane amounts of money.
But what I noticed was he was doing $1,000 of work a week for $300 and not complaining, because he was like, I believe in what you're doing, and I want my son to make sure he has a great place to work. I want his company to be, good. And then after a while, we'd meet and conversations would get to, hey, I kind of see some things y'all could do better. And I'm like, really? What would you do? And he was like, and then it just slowly built into finally the conversation. He was working for a company making a bunch of money. He was like, I'm bored to death. It's too easy. It's just, I could retire, and I live on a golf course. I could retire and I could do 20% effort for the rest of my life and make fine money. He was like, that drives me nuts, because I want to fight. I want something that's seemingly impossible.
This is resonating right now.
Right. Yeah. Right. And he was like, and he was like, I'd like to help you guys. And I go, okay. And so we kind of talked through what some of those structuring would be. And I was like, well, I could pay you this. And he's like, that's about 60% of what I'm making right now. I go, that's what I could do.
That's what I can pay you.
That's what I could do. And he goes, okay, I'll do it. He goes, now the deal will be, within a year or so, I'd like to be paid what I'm paid now, but only if I make it possible to do that. So I will come in and make it possible for that to happen. And if it happens, pay me that. And if not, you do what you want.
I'll bet on myself.
I'll bet on myself.
Yeah.
And I go, well,
I mean, you got to like a guy that, like, I love that mentality.
Safe bet.
Yeah.
And he spent over the next year and a half, he lived in Beaufort, and he spent 274 days in a hotel room in the next year and a half. Drove up from grinder in his 60s, and just
not married.
Kids are all out. Son was working with us. He's like, hey, I worked a lot in my early days. I want to work beside my son in my later years. And I want to see my son have a place that's a strong place to work. Yeah. You guys have these amazing strong suits, and you have some amazing weaknesses. And I think I could bring something to the table. And if not, fire me. I'll go, okay.
So what position did he come in? Did you put him in as like a COO, CEO? What did he come in as?
Yeah, kind of an operations manager.
Okay.
Operations manager.
So the stuff that he identified potentially for improvement was operational efficiencies, or like the entire thing?
Operational efficiencies, like, I mean, just some wild stuff. I mean, like, we had a great product and a great base of people that followed us, but we just didn't have the volume, and there was just some things we just didn't know. And one of the things was just terrifying. I mean, we weren't doing well financially. It was just like, we're trying to figure it out, And first thing he's like, you got to give everybody raises. I'm like, what? We have, like, this isn't a thing. He's like, your fastest source to cash are the people who already work here. They already bought in. They already know everything. You don't have to hire outside, but you got to motivate them to go slay. So did he identify that they needed to be more motivated, that they needed a little bit of a push? A little bit of a push, and more just a buy-in that something was going to change. That makes a lot of sense. It was a burn the ships mentality. And it was a we're going to burn the ships, and I'm going to give you the matches to do it. So you'll know we're doing it. And so it was terrifying. It was
I was going to say that's, as an owner,
you're in it 30 years and someone says like, I know you don't have any money, but you need to give everyone raises. By the way, that doesn't include you.
Yeah.
And
of
which
course,
is fine.
You're the one, you pay yourself last.
Well, sure. Which
Yeah.
is fine. But you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this better work. And so just having his insight was super influential, obviously, and just mentorship of a guy who's done a whole lot of other different things and has seen the ups and downs and the fights and the this and the that, and he was not from our world, which was great.
What was he? You don't have to get into super specifics, but what was he doing in general from a position standpoint prior to coming over to you?
Well, in the past 30 something years, he had owned custom house building construction companies.
Okay.
He built bridges. He built cell towers for in Mexico and all over the US. He
had an entrepreneur mentality.
But also like wrote the like all the contracting stuff through these little towns and Bowman and Olar and stuff like that to get water treatment plants in, and then headed all the whole thing up on building the water treatment plants there from an engineering standpoint. What?
Created his own marketplace.
Just understood how to make things go, and then also how to turn the screws to do it, or dig the hole to do it too.
Yeah.
So you get a guy that's a certified welder, builds stuff his whole life, that also understands how money flows and things like that. And so having someone there that just understood so many pieces. And the fun part was he didn't know jack crap about weightlifting. But I had to get over that didn't matter. He's like, that's what you're for. That's what your dad's for.
Right.
You tell me where we want to get and I'll help us get there. Just you keep coming up with great designs and do the branding side and do what do you want this thing to look like? And then let me help build the ship. And then building under that and, bringing in more manufacturing and just so that's been huge. And so it's, everyone gives, probably most people give me the accolades of, oh, your dad had a business and then you blew it up. Or, I give accolades to my dad because without that doesn't, he started the whole mess.
Right.
Right. And then you have my COO who came in and just saw it from a different mindset and a different viewpoint and brought things to the table that we had none of. We had everything else in spades, but then, when you have these massive weaknesses, and you don't know enough to know that you know it, you just know the thing isn't working like it should.
How long did it take for that to gain traction and for you to really start to see that big kind of where you looked at it and went, oh, this is working?
I would say within the first year. The first year or so was hell. It was hard. I'd kind of like to say that it's always been hard. It was hard for the first 30 something years. And it's never been easy. I even we were in hyper growth for the last 8 years, and that's tapered off a bit, but we're still growing for a decade now. But it's never been easy. And that's what I think people have to understand is we grew 50x in 10 years. Guess what? It was never easy. It's not easy on whatever today is, September 14th, 2023. It's not easy today. There's still pull your hair out, you've got to be kidding me moments.
Yeah.
Like right now, and in some ways and within the market, we're the belle of the ball. Everyone's like, you guys are killing. Well, define that. I don't know. Have we done a whole lot of work for some really amazing people and we tend to generally be one of the top choices? Yeah. It doesn't mean it was any easier than it was 10 years ago. It's just different. And that was something that he also told me. One day I asked him, I was like, does this ever get easier?
No.
Right.
It doesn't.
And he goes, no, our problems will just have more zeros behind them.
That's right. He's right.
And you're like, oh, okay. So just brace for impact and just realize that you're going to brace for impact and keep going. Probably much like football, right? So when you're a little leaguer, people are still trying to tackle you and beat you up. It's just they're kind of more appropriately sized. They don't stop doing it when you get to college. They get bigger and stronger, and hopefully you get bigger and stronger and able to. And then when you get to the NFL, they're bigger and stronger, and you're bigger and stronger and faster. So it's kind of always hard. And you just have to kind of, I think entrepreneurs and business owners just have to come to that realization. And I have to remember it some days.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're young, when you have like, I see this all over social media, right?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
this entrepreneur, like you can be your own this and you be your own that. And there's a whole different
It's like the 40K joke. It's like, do this, make 40K.
Exactly.
Do this, make 40K.
Like, oh,
you're
do you
like,
want your Instagram to have 2 million followers? And then you look at their Instagram and it has like 2,500. Right. Okay. Well, how come you're not doing for yourself what you're trying to charge to do for somebody else? But whole different story.
Yeah, whole different story.
Right. But I mean, we've owned, you know, medical spas, surgery centers, plastic surgery practices, like all this different kind of stuff. And it was for a while when I first started businesses, right, I was always in that same mindset, like, okay, when does autopilot kick in? Right. And I always kind of thought, okay, when we hit this, then it's going to be on cruise control. And then you'd get there and then you'd be like, okay, I know that we have to do X and Y and Z, and then it's going to hit cruise control.
Right.
And you at a certain point go, it's never going to hit cruise control. Never. And when you try to check out and make it hit cruise control, that's when your business stagnates, because now you're not running it with the same level of intensity that you did to get it to where it is.
That is 100% right. It's and it's kind of like this. It's kind of sad in some ways, because like a Paradise Lost, it's like, hey, by the way, there is no Santa. like this is going to be kind of bloody and crazy and gnashing of teeth every day. You're just going to gnash teeth with more zeros behind it.
Yeah.
And you're probably, what was it? I think as Nelson, my COO said, hey, he said, at some point in this whole thing, we're still going to have problems, but when you read the menu, you're going to look at the meal first, not the number.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, you'll read it. What was it, like left to right instead of right to left? You won't look at what you could afford and see if you like it. And he goes, that's just kind of the difference, right?
Yeah.
Like,
there'll be a problem there, but you'll know that it's not going to wreck your company.
It's not going to wreck
just
your
a problem
company
you have
and
to
wreck
solve.
your life. Yeah. And I heard Arnold say that. I was in a board meeting with him for the Arnold Classic one time. And he said, he goes, there are no problems. They're just challenges.
Yeah.
And it was like, all right, okay. So just realize that it's kind of like in the NFL. Guys are going to try to tackle you every play.
Yeah.
That's the game. Like, it's going to suck a lot of days.
Yeah.
Like,
that's right.
The goal is just to make it suck less through you believing in what you're doing. There's some laughs and some fun time and some high points in there. And then every once in a while, when you get a respite, maybe you get a respite with a better view out your backyard.
Yeah.
Or maybe you get a respite in Italy instead of
instead of Myrtle Beach.
In Florence, Italy instead of Florence, South Carolina. Pick your Florence.
Every once in a while, Santa can come, though. I will tell you, like the 3 different times that we've sold the businesses we built has been Christmas morning.
Right. I've never experienced that.
Well, you may never, because you're in something you love, right? But like what I found myself doing, like I love building things. I am not an operator. I don't like operating. And so everything that we've built, we've gotten to a certain point, and then we've always gotten to this point where, okay, do we want to expand this and keep making it bigger, or do we want to sell it and go do something where we see a different opportunity? And that's kind of what we've always done. Yeah, more space. And so I've always kind of evolved from, doing this to doing this, and then now teaching people how to do it.
It's huge.
But I really liked the Christmas morning piece.
Yeah.
Just because all the stuff that you've been worrying about for 10 years or 15 years, you literally are just walking away.
It goes away for a minute.
Yeah, it goes away for a minute, and you just breathe, right? And then you have this period of time where you're like, this is amazing. And then the same thing that made you do it from the beginning makes you do it again, because that's how you're built. That's who you are.
Yes. That's a beautiful way to put it. And I'll be honest, there's a little bit of envy there, because it's in some ways SORINEX is so inextricably linked to me and somewhere in my DNA. It's kind of like, you remember the last scene in Moby Dick where like Ahab is like tied to the whale. He finally caught the whale, and he's forever tied to it, right? And so there's a bit of that. So I have friends that are kind of maybe don't know it. They're like, so what's your exit strategy? I'm like, what do you mean?
My kids.
Yeah, and they're like,
Yeah.
no, seriously, like, when are you gonna sell it? Like, right off in the sunset. I'm like they're speaking Greek. I'm like,
Right. I've never thought about that in my life.
And they're like, you've never thought about that? I'm like, should I have? And so partly one of the kind of strategies was probably 10 years ago, after having this conversation was, okay, build the business somewhat to sell. And it doesn't mean I want to sell it, but I figured out if I build it and we build it to where it could be sold, it will inherently have more value and it
Right.
will inherently be running better. And then you still have the option if you ever want to sell it, which is not
Yeah.
the goal, but it's better to have the option than not.
Right.
And if you have a business that people want to buy, then it probably is doing pretty well and you're not missing meals.
No question.
So that was just
and your view gets pretty good too.
Yeah, your view gets pretty good, but that was never the mindset. The mindset was like almost like a subsistence level, like we got to keep this thing going, like whatever. And it's like, hold on a minute. Like if you're not in the thrive mindset and the growth mindset, then you're literally dying. And it's kind of like working out. You know, you're either getting stronger or you're getting weaker. One of the two are happening. Because it's just you don't stay the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like my training right now are just kind of showing up at the gym, because there's definitely eras in my life where like I put in work, but I know I didn't get stronger or more fit. It was just kind of just pumping the brakes of sliding down the hill. I just slowed down my decrease, you know, and as you get older, I mean, that's kind of the you know, kind of what you're dealt anyway. But there are definitely ways you could ramp it back up. And so that's kind of keeping that mindset. Have you read the book Predictable Success?
Who wrote that? Because the title sounds familiar.
Boy, I can't remember. Bad with names. But it was interesting because he talked about the 7 phases of a business. And it was like the startup and the fun phase where like everything is awesome. You're putting points on the board. And this is just like,
this is amazing. This is going to be amazing.
This is amazing. I'm sure you've thrived in those eras as well. And then there's the whitewater phase where it's like you're too big to be little and too little to be big. And like, you better get this figured out because the infrastructure has to change. Like your success has become your detriment because now the system can't handle the success.
That's what like my business is now. Like my business it was organic. Like people were in that phase and saw what we had done and just started calling. Right. And going, how'd you do that?
So you're getting people from whitewater into predictable success.
Right. They've kind of done what they can do on their own. They're good at what they do, but they don't know how to get through the whitewater, and they've just created their own nightmare. Right. And they think this is the worst thing ever. Like, I'm never going to get through this, but they don't realize, like you said, on the other side of that, they're close.
Yes. And that's what the book talks about. They said predictable success is basically the equivalent of stepping on the gas in a car and it goes. So you have all the systems in place, and then you could focus on the gas versus the sky is falling every day.
Yeah.
And they said what a lot of entrepreneurs do, they get cold feet, and then especially employees start saying, we should go back to how it was before, because they viewed fun phase as success.
Yeah, that was success.
So they back off and they change things and they go backwards and they get back into fun and everyone's happy for a minute. But what happens? They have more success and it pushes them right back into whitewater, and they bounce between whitewater and fun, and they literally kill their business slowly because they keep moving back to the left in the phase versus pushing through whitewater into predictable success. It was an interesting book.
What did it say about how to push through it into predictable success?
Generally systems.
Yeah. Processes and systems.
Processes and systems. And one of the big pieces was sometimes it was a changing of the guards, because the owners, operators, and founders were a lot of times the problem, because their passion and their everything is what got them into fun.
Yeah.
Also pushed them into whitewater, and then they can't get out of their own way in whitewater.
You know what's super interesting about that? So the majority of the people that I work with, I try to work with younger people.
Sure.
Because they're very open to change, and they haven't like bought into their own success yet.
Right.
They're smart enough to recognize they got where they are because they're talented, but they realize they know what they don't know. The people who have been doing it for 20 years,
it's a tough one,
and have been probably in whitewater for a really, really long time, as much whitewater as they're in, even if you go in and you say A, B, and C is going to get you out of this, they're like, but I do it this way.
Right.
Like, okay, you've been doing it for 15 years. Has that done anything for you?
Right.
But they'll literally argue with you about it.
Yeah.
To the point
Yeah.
where now I profile the people that I choose to work with, because
Wow.
those people they do not allow themselves to be successful. It's unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, hey, I've seen it. I mean, heck, I've been there, you know, and because what happens is that owner, founder, whatever, they're in whitewater, but their tail of the tape is still in fun.
Yeah.
So they're like, no, but we did this, 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 and this.
Exactly.
And you're like, yeah,
this is how I got here.
You were a different business then. You were in fun when you're putting shots on the board. Everyone's down with you. The industry loves you. You're coming up. Everyone's pumped about it. Well, now
you're the shiny new penny.
You're the shiny new penny. And now you have to do real business.
Yeah.
And I mean, heck, I was there. Like, and that was one of those things that my CEO helped me out with. It was like, we were in whitewater, and, you know, and you kind of, he was like, hey, these things need to change. And it was like stressful because you're telling a 25-year-old, 30-year-old business at that time, like, we need to change some things. Like, yeah, but we've done, you know, these guys and Super Bowl champs and these and like all this stuff. It's like, well, then why are you still having problems?
Right.
Why is it still hard? You know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, even looking at, well, let's hire a marketing company. And it's like, no, we do our marketing. No one knows us like us, you know. let's, you know, I mean, it was so absurd. You think about it now, it's like, we need to have install managers. No, sales guys do it because they worked on the job and they know what it is and they have the relationship with the customer. No one's ever going to be able to do as good as we are. Really?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Has there been problems? Sure. But those guys get spooled up. Everyone's on the same page. And it is so funny. Like, in almost every facet of the business, like, there was definitely some holding on. And then once we did, might have been shaky at first, might have even had the wrong people on the bus.
Yeah.
You have to switch those people out.
I mean, dude, that's a big part of it too, right? Is like, when you change the process, you also have to make the right people on the bus. Because they're used to the old process. And some people come along and go, yes, this is the way. But some people will fight you kicking and screaming. And you got to have the courage to be like, I know you did an amazing job for us during fun, but if you can't recognize that this is the direction we're going, then the timing isn't like, we're not the right place to be together anymore.
That is huge. It's almost like, I would believe it was an Exodus when they're being brought out into the desert, and they're like, oh, this is horrible, isn't it? And they're like, let's go back to where we were. And you're like, hey, remember where we were then? Like, the persecution, like, come on, man. It's like, yeah, but all right, the unknown is scary.
Right.
And you'd almost rather sometimes go with the slavery you knew versus the unknown.
Yeah.
And you see it. I mean, I've seen it. Heck, I've seen it this week. You know, guys are like, well, we always in. It's like, heck, I've done it. And it never stops. Like, everyone has to kind of be like rechecked at all times, because you're exactly right. And sometimes some people have to be removed, and it's not because they're bad people. They're just not culturally fit for where you're going.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
You know,
I see that all the time.
Yeah. I was talking with Keith Powers, who's he was at Cal Berkeley years ago when we did a job out there, and he was a performance director. And he said the two most important things for athletics, as well as just any organization, and he came from Europe and was an Olympian, the whole deal. He says the two things, he said, was mental toughness. Can you do the hard things when you don't want to? Can you put up with things that just resolve,
that suck?
The resilience. Right?
Yeah.
Number two was cultural fitness. He goes, are you fit to be in the organization that you're currently in? He said, those are the two things, the lack of, that will remove people faster than anything. And I thought it was so interesting. He talked about cultural fitness. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, at Berkeley, there's a certain type of athlete that needs to be here, a certain type of person, whatever. Now, you take someone from the culture of Nebraska and throw them at Berkeley, they're probably gonna have a bad experience. It's not that they're a bad player. They just may or may not jive with that whole thing.
Yeah.
And so, and I look at it in businesses too, like, hey, this person just, and maybe the culture is wrong. Maybe that person's right and the culture is not fit for him. So it could go both ways.
Yeah. And
so I just always remember that he was like, boiled it down to two things: mental toughness, cultural fitness. So
that's,
if you get those things dialed, he's like, you got a chance.
I believe that. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And it applies to the stuff that I do too. I mean, it's totally, well, I mean, the credit, obviously, the fact that you were willing to recognize that and go and do something that was very uncomfortable is, that's why you are where you are.
It's uncomfortable every day.
Yeah. Well,
it's every
you want to be an entrepreneur? Really? Welcome to the world.
Oh
right?
My gosh.
That's how it goes.
It's crazy. It's honestly not like people that have been hyper successful. I'm still in awe.
Oh, I do that too.
Of things that people have like, wow, you really figured that out and got that dialed. And I don't think there's been ever an escalator to the top for anybody, even though it maybe looks like it at times. There's these big jumps, you know.
Yeah. But I think usually those jumps, at least from what I've seen, is always like what you did. It's like, it's finding somebody to plug into the organization that knows how to do the thing that you haven't figured out how to do yet.
Yes.
Right. That's what makes the next big jump in your organization in most cases.
Right. Or it's an accumulation of a level and is a quantity of quality work that's maybe just been unseen. And so we talk about like that 10-year rule, whether it's football, track and field, hunting, like whatever it may be.
The overnight success.
Right. The overnight, the 2-decade overnight success.
Yeah.
How to build a world-class brand in 30 short years.
That's usually what it's like.
Yeah.
You guys just blew up. Well, we've been around since the 80s. So
yeah, people will say this, dude, y'all blew up. I'm thinking, I mean, gosh, like, yeah, we've been around since 80.
Yeah.
Like that's, I guess you could say, cool that you think that. It means you've kind of bought in, I guess. Like, but you know, and you look back and what I kind of realized through multiple means that everyone I know that is like what I would consider successful to hyper successful, we're all doing the same thing 10 years ago. All of them. Now they might just be known for it now, but you look back, I mean, like you talk about arguably one of the most successful and influential people on the planet, Joe Rogan. You get talking to him, you're like, oh, right. You were, he's calling he's a podcast. Like, yeah, but he was working at Fear Factor. 25 years ago. Like he was, his chops were there for announcing and interviewing and having great conversations. And you're like, oh, he's doing jujitsu and stuff at the UFC. He was instructing jujitsu and taekwondo and stuff like that in the 90s. You know, he was been a black belt in whatever since the 90s, you know, and you look, you're like, oh, right. Like, great. He got $100 million job or deal at Spotify. His body of work has been going for 30 years.
Right.
No one gave a crap about what that guy was talking about 20 years ago. It was interesting.
Yeah.
You know, and now you're like, oh, right. Cause you just stayed with and you became like a ninja at what you do. And that's the stuff that excites me, because then I look at the other way and go, you kind of start like speculating. You're like, oh, that person's doing something different and interesting. Where's he going to be in 10 years? Like that's the one to keep your eye on, because no one knows anything about that person yet. They're just that interesting person doing something.
Yeah.
But in 10 years, they're your next Jocko Willink, Cam Haynes, like whoever that is, because all those cats were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Everything they're known for now, they were doing 10 years ago. They just, no one knew it or cared yet.
Yeah.
There wasn't enough reps. There wasn't enough. And so that's where I get like, or even anything I'm good at. I'm good at very few things, and the things I'm good at, I'm pretty good at them. But everything I've done at least 10 years. And I was like, oh, that's my thing. I'm passionate enough to do it for a long time, and I'm resilient enough to keep doing it.
And get good at it. Right.
It doesn't make me a ninja. It just means I've shot a bow 8 million times. I've lifted a gazillion weights. Like,
I was going to say, I know,
keep showing up.
I know you've got like a time limit, but I want to talk about your mule deer hunt.
Oh yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I love the business conversation though. Cause that's like when I started this, a big part of it for me was exploring a lot of things. Honestly, for me, it was just, what am I interested in?
Sure.
You know, and a lot of it's personal. A lot of it's, how do you get from here to here? Because I've got a pretty, you know, my journey has been very different as I've gotten older, and I've gone through kind of like you, I've kind of done these ebbs, and, you know, I've kind of on one of these upswing things.
Yeah.
You
Congratulations.
know, as an old man.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, it's super cool. Like it doesn't need to be glossed over that you've done so many, whether it's business or football or coaching or mentorship, and that you continue to reinvent yourself, but all in the same vein, which is observation, strategy, reps, passion for it. And you keep doing it and not doing it as a young man. You're not old, but like that you have the passion to go like, hey, I'm going to take up hunting. I'm going to do this podcast. I'm going to do like, that is super inspiring, because that's the type of man I want to be. Like, I want to die a young man a long time from now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's just like, how do I want to be continually excited about the voyage ahead, and it's really cool to watch you and like send me texts asking all these questions, and they're like, I don't want to bother you. I'm like, no, this is awesome. Like that you're passionate enough that you're asking questions and that you found someone that could hopefully be helpful. That's huge. Like that's the point of life in many ways.
Oh no, there's no question. But it is like that. Like when you're, it is very much like when I was 20 years old or 21 years old and I was a super young coach. Now there's no text messaging back then, right?
Sure.
We were all in a room.
Yeah.
But I would just bug the living hell out of the O-line coach, right? And then I got to be really good friends with this guy who ended up being my mentor and eventually in football. And he just retired a couple of years
Who's
ago.
that?
His name's Pat Rule, but he was the offensive line coach for Pete Carroll at Southern Cal.
Cool.
And then at the Seahawks. He was with the Packers for a while, but the way I met him was I was at Carolina coaching. I was a young coach. He was the offensive coordinator at Kansas. They wanted to learn about this passing game that we're running, the shallow cross passing game, which everyone does now, but back then it was unique, right? Mm-hmm. Brad Scott had brought it from Florida State. So they brought their whole staff in to learn about it. And our staff spent like about 5 hours with them and then said, hey, there's a bunch of film, watch as many cut-ups as you want, you know, and they went back to coaching their team. And the guys on our staff were like, hey, Eric, like hang around and help them with whatever they need. And then they ended up keeping me in the room for 2 days being like, oh, how do you read this? And what are you doing here? Right. And I had learned it through the guys that I know. And so I ended up developing this relationship with him. He's the guy that really taught me O-line play better than anybody, you know, and I was doing what I'm doing to you right now on the phone constantly. Like, hey, I'm running the inside zone. I can't get the tackle to like make this cut off on the backside. What are you doing with this front side foot? Right. And that's so like cool. That's how I learned it, you know. Yeah. It was that way.
Well, that's what we caught it.
But that's what I feel like. I feel like a 20-year-old kid bugging the crap out of you.
Well, and if you see the outgoing text that I have to other guys in the industry, it's like, you know, the John Dudleys and guys like that. I'm just like, I'm asking questions all the time because they got more reps than I do.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have a lot of reps, but he has more reps and I'm interested. Like, tell me what this or Derek Woodsky when it comes to training. Like he and I are the same age, but while I was building weightlifting equipment, he was, you know, under some of the tutelage of some of the best strength coaches in the world. And was going down that deep rabbit hole. So it's like, I annoy so many people out there with so many text messages and questions.
Well, that makes me feel better.
Oh yeah. It's great. But that's passion, right? I mean, my coach in college used to get mad at me because I'd ask so many questions and he thought I was kind of like questioning him.
Yeah. No, you're trying to learn.
I was just trying to learn.
Right.
This is where I wanted to go in life. So he was just like, just freaking do it. And I'm like, listen, I got mad. I'm like, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just really interested. All right. Like I'm just asking because I'm trying to learn. He's like, oh, okay. Right.
I think the reason people sometimes get freaked out by that is because most people's ego keeps them from asking questions.
Right.
You know, which what I found interesting is in this hunting community is that now I don't know, maybe it's just because I found really good people. But it seems like the people that I run into in this community are not like that. Like they understand mentorship.
Sure.
They
all had to have a mentor.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
no one just figured it out.
So it seems different a little bit to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But
that is generally to an extent.
I'm sure there's guys with huge egos that I just don't know.
That is zero question. There's guys with huge egos, and there's guys that they feel like they have to be the guy that kills the biggest whatever, and because their image relies on it. And I mean, and sometimes their business does. I mean, they might be sponsored by all these companies, and if they're not killing really big stuff, those companies aren't interested. You know, that's a little bit of a fear of me working in that outdoor industry because I never want to get to that spot. Like people wanted to work with me in different ways, and I've felt it. I'm like, oh man, like I can't go on too many more mule deer hunts and not score. Like. You know, it's kind of like I'm a football coach. Yeah, but you never won a game. You're like, yeah, but I love football. You know?
That was your fourth one? Like
fifth.
So I didn't know this. What's the story behind that?
Okay. So, I mean, I had been invited by Kip Fulks, co-founder of Under Armour, a friend of mine. And he started the whole Under Armour hunt line and everything like that. He's the one that signed on Cameron Haynes as the first athlete ever at Under Armour. Like he's an OG. And so we became friends after he got out of Under Armour. And then he was kind of tracking me and SORINEX Outdoors. And he was like one of the first guys was like, dude, this is a thing. Like you really need to do something with it. Like, I'll help out if you need to. And what he did, which was really cool, he budgeted like a lot of money a year, personal money, to take people hunting.
Okay.
And I go, why'd you do that? He goes, because for a $10,000 hunt, I could hang out with you for a week and I know everything I need to know about you. Are you prepared? Do you keep a good attitude? Do you keep going when it gets hard? Do you make stupid decisions? Are you a good person to hang around in camp? He's like, anyone could fake it for a golf outing. You can't fake hunt camp for a week. He's like, you're either good or you're not, or you're willing to learn, or are you tired and you want to sleep in on day 3 because you've walked 10 miles a day the first 2 days and now you're getting frustrated because you missed a buck.
So is that how he was using that to a certain extent to evaluate who he wanted to be business partners with?
Yeah. He's like, I'll spend a couple $100,000 a year to know who I want to deal with, who I want to work with.
When you sell Under Armour, you can do that, right?
Yeah, you can do what you want.
Yeah. So that's super smart, though.
Super smart.
Like super smart.
Yeah. And he's like, and I get to go on hunts. I get to enjoy new people, learn stuff. And he goes, but I know what companies I want to invest in. I know what people I want to invest in. I know people who are fake. He's like, it's great. It's cheap. And I was like, gosh, dog, that's pretty cool.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah. So he invited me on a MuleDeer hunt.
Had you ever been on a MuleDeer hunt before?
It was one of those dreams. This was like 5 years ago in Arizona at Big Chino Outfitters. Like Adam Greentree was with us, and so like there's some hitters in the industry. I'm like, man, I'm gonna get a hunt with some dogs,
some bombs.
Yeah. And so, it didn't work out. Got really close, learned a lot, got my nuts kicked in. Like, just like, okay, this is a different animal out here. But it was like, okay, this is something I want to do. And so I've gone to Big Chino a couple other times, and it's a 2% success rate hunt. If you're self-guided, it's public land, high desert mule deer, archery, spot and stalk. There's very few things in the continental United States that is harder to do.
So did you do them all self-guided? Like, was the one that you went
2% is self-guided.
Oh, if it's self-guided, it's 2%.
When you go with Big Chino, who are wonderful guides, they said they could get you to about 20%. So you're 10 times better chance, but it's
still 1 in 5.
1 in 5.
Yeah.
And that's a weak hunt.
And that's 20% on one shot, right?
That's 20% you kill.
Oh, that you kill.
That's usually kill, like success.
Okay.
But they also deem it a success if you get within 100 yards of a buck, of a shooter. And so they kind of tell you, like I showed it the first day, and they go, they're like, well, what's your shot comfort? And I go, I'd like to get within 30 yards, and the guide kind of looks at me, and I'm like, but 50 will probably work. And he's like, cool. And then like later that day, Greentree killed a buck at 72 and another guy killed one at like 79. And I'm like, with a bow. And I'm like, what are y'all people doing? They're like, welcome to the West. Like, you better be able to roll.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, and they go, yeah.
So those things jump like whitetail? Like, are they as jumpy or not?
They're jumpy in the way that they get attacked by mountain lions all the time.
Yeah.
So they're big ears. They're sitting in a desert that's crinkly to walk on. They're on edge all the time. So they're hard to sneak up on. And I mean, it's a hard, jumpy animal. So they tell you, they're like, if we get you within 100, we consider it a good stalk. It's on you after that.
You got to get in there and get the shot.
If you could get in the red zone and get it done, like that's out of our stand. Like we've done our job.
Yeah.
And so you start understanding, like, okay, I have to step up my game.
Yeah.
Like this 30-yard whitetail Eastern shot is like a joke. This ain't happening. So that's what got me really more into archery. I'd bow hunted for 15, 20 years at a time. But this was like, you better step up your game. You better get better equipment. You better really learn how to use it. You better be taking far shots, like constantly learning this whole thing. So it leveled me up.
And that was just 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Okay.
And so I went to Chino another 2 times. Got really close both times. I mean, within 40 yards of shooters both times. But it's kind of like the red zone in football. Like you could be within 15 of the goal line. A lot of stuff could still happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a 7 for sure. It's not a 6-point deal for sure.
It doesn't mean you're even getting to the 1 to get in.
It doesn't mean jack.
Yeah, that's right.
A million things could happen. And the deer get a vote. Like he gets a vote on the whole thing, right? And so you start realizing that. So anyway, I went to Wyoming one time, and every one of my hunts, I'd gotten so close, like to the point where it's like, you start kind of thinking like, all right, I'm just not meant to do this. Like this animal just has my number. I can't figure this out. Like other mule deer are for other people. Like these are just.
So you were getting within shooting range. You just couldn't get a shot, or you'd bump. They get spooked and get bumped,
spooked.
and
The wind would swirl.
Yeah.
They blow out.
Okay.
You know, I missed one at 50. I missed one at 72 and at 69. One went under, one went over. I mean, it's just like everything that could have happened has happened. I was at full draw on an absolute giant at 42 yards. And at 22 yards, there's a little tree between he and I that I just can't shoot through. Like I picked the one spot,
the one spot,
and then he saw me, blew out. Like it was just like, oh my gosh, this is like impossible. No, this is inhuman for someone to be able to pull this off, right? So I kept on. I got invited to go to Utah this year, and I'm like, and so my buddy tells me, he's like, hey, just so you know, I'm thinking, okay, going to Utah, new spot, super well known area, where we're gonna crush.
Mm-hmm.
And then I hear that Utah had their worst snow kill of deer in the last generation. They said some people said they lost 90% of their deer herd.
90%.
They had a giant snow right outside of Salt Lake. So the snow was like 10 or 15 feet deep. So the deer couldn't get to food.
Right.
So all the big bucks who were done rutting, they were all worn down. They had a higher metabolic rate.
To
stay starved. So they're like, we lost most of our shooters. I was like, oh, now we just made something that was really hard, really hard. Jeez. And then he told me, he was like, yeah, they got a bad kill this year. And he's like, also last year we had 5 or 6 guys in cam and hunted and 1 guy killed. So I'm like, okay, we're back to 20%.
Yeah.
We're back to that on a good year. Now we have the snow kill year.
Mm-hmm.
Great. But you know, you get invited to go, you go.
Right?
You go. So I went into it. I said, only thing I could control is my controllables. I have to be in shape. I have to be ready to shoot. And that was the whole shoot to eat thing. That was the training. That was all. I was like, if I could clean up all my variables and I get an opportunity, I have to be able to close. Like this isn't a thing. I can't leave anything up to chance. It's already too low of a percentage. And the first day we got in, and
what's the terrain like for those?
The terrain, 7,000 elevation, hilly, sagebrush, low sagebrush, very few trees, some bigger kind of like maple trees and bushy maple trees, some junipers, rocks and shale, and just crap.
Nasty,
hot. I mean, it's in late August, so it's
it's hot,
80, 90 degrees.
Yeah.
You're walking, that hunt isn't too bad. You're maybe 7 to 8 miles a day, but 7,000 elevation. You're not taking a big pack. You're just taking like a little camelback kind of pack, super light.
Okay.
So you basically go out, you go to a high spot, you set up on your binoculars, you start just scanning a mile in every direction, and you're just looking for
glassing
pieces of deer.
Okay.
And you see a horn sticking out at 800 yards under this, and you're like watching. Finally he stands up. You're like, good deer, bad deer, not bad, but like, is he old enough? We're shooting age, not size. Like, okay, he's a mature deer. He happens to be 155 inches ish. Is that a deer you want to go after? He's mature. Let's put a stalk on him.
Mm-hmm.
So then you assess which way the wind's going. What does he look like he's feeding right now? Probably better just to let him bed back down. The sun gets real hot. So basically you're letting him bed down under a tree, knowing that as the earth rotates and the sun moves, he'll probably get up 2 to 3 hours later when the sun gets on his back. So that's kind of your stopwatch start. So you're like, now we got him. He's 2,000 yards out. Figure out your stalk plan, watch your wind, mark the deer somehow off of strategy and terrain. And you got 2 hours to get within bow range of him, hopefully getting there before he stands up. And when he stands up, you need to be within 40 or 50 of him and put an arrow in his vitals. Like that's your game, which is super fun. It's awesome.
It sounds pretty amazing.
It's super awesome. And so usually we'll find that deer, and then we'll get somebody else on the glass, and they'll sit up on the high spot. I put a radio in my ear, and they'll walk us in like a football play, and which is super fun in itself. But sometimes you just they lose sight of the deer, and they're like, "Hey, you're on your own. You're blind. Like, you just kind of got to know what's going on." Hence, what makes it so freaking difficult, right?
It sounds hard as hell.
Yeah. So we end up first day. We got on these 2 bucks. They'd already scouted them this summer. They found them in these big bowls, and they're like, we know there's these 2 shooters live in this area, and that's what you pay the guide for, right? Mm-hmm. He's doing the homework.
He knows what's there.
250,000 acres. He knows where $25 are.
Yeah.
Or where they generally are. We got up there first day, boom, big 3x3, big 5x4. Hey, which one you like? Whichever one's offers the best strategy. One bed's down. We do the big loop. We come up. We get 45 yards from him. And you just see these points sticking out over the sage. And it's just like, this is day one, stalk one. You're like, holy crap. 45 yards is red zone for me. It's like, he stands up, he's dead. Like, this is going to finally work. Like, finally freaking work. This is wild, you know? And I sat on my knees in the dirt for 2.5 hours in the sun. And
just waiting for him to stand up.
And you would just watch his head. You'd watch him, like, head would go down, like he would kind of nod off to sleep, and he'd pop back up, and he'd hear something, he'd move his. So you're just watching, and so you're like making a rhythm with this animal. You're like living through his eyes in some way. You're like, oh, he's feeling this right now. He's agitated. He's doing this. There's bugs on. Like, you're starting to just really dial in. And so my guide was like, hey man, when he stands up, get your bow back, kill him. I'm like, okay. Well, that was more of a semi-directive versus, you have to watch which direction he's facing. So as he's standing up, I go ahead and draw back, and he just happens to be facing me as he's standing up. He just locks eyes with me, and they say, like, as much horn as you could see is how much body you'll be able to see when they stand up. So if we saw the tips, that means when he stands up, I could just see the top of his back.
Okay.
So I needed to know that, which I didn't know. So you learn. And so he stood up, chest was still covered, and he and I have a face off. And so I stayed at full draw on the video for 2.5 minutes at full draw, and just him staring at me. And I'm just sitting there, and not that I would have shot him at that point, but I just didn't want to let down, because he knew something was up, but he couldn't figure it out.
Right.
So I'm sitting there. My guy's like, dude, you okay? I'm like, no,
I'm smoked.
I'm smoked right now. And both shoulders are starting to spasm. And I'm like, I got to let down in a minute. He's like, yeah, just do what you got to do, man. So I kind of laid down in the grass and let back down. And I was just like, he was like, all right, if you get ready to shoot. I was like, I can't move right now. Like, give me a second. Like, I'm done. So he sees us, bounces off, and like, man, and part of you is like, okay, that was my opportunity this week. Like,
yeah, you're thinking
that was
my
one.
That was my 20%, right?
We stand up, we walk a little ways. That 3x gets up. He's 100 yards away. We make a stalk. We get him within 50. I'm like, oh my gosh.
So the other one was just 100 yards away?
Yeah, they were just bedded down. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Just like, he happened to get up out of his bed at the same time. He happened to not see us. We got in on him. He's at 50 yards. I'm like, he's dead. He sits down. Oh, jeez.
Here we go again.
I look at my guy. I go, how long do you think he's going to be down? He's like, it's going to be a while. And I'm like, I can't do another 2.5 hours sitting in the sun. Just my knees are killing me. My back's killing me. I'm dehydrated. Like, I'm a sissy at this point. I'm like, dude, I'm about to going crazy. I was like, circle around him and throw some rocks at him or something. Make some noise. Like, make him stand up. He's like, that's not a bad idea. So he circles around downwind and starts making these like little kissy sounds, like a rabbit dying. Sees, and I could see the deer's head turning. And I was like, oh, he's staying up. He's dead. Nothing happens. I'm like, about 30 minutes later, I'm like, well, I see a bush in front of me. I'm going to slip in a little bit closer to him. I'm in the middle of slipping into him. I hear on the radio, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him. I'm look up, and the deer's up.
You on your knees right now? You're crawling?
I'm on all fours, crawling.
And where's your bow?
In front
in your hand or on your back?
In my hand.
Yeah.
Well, he decided he will throw a rock at him, and he crawled forward to pick up a rock. Well, as he's crawling, I'm crawling. We didn't look at each other to see what the other guy's doing. Neither one of us thought that other one was going to make a stupid move. He threw the rock. The deer stood up perfectly. Had I been watching, he'd been dead. And as that goes back to just like, you're in the red zone, communication was bad.
Yeah.
He zigged. I should have zagged one of those. And you're just like, so then I'm looking at, okay, 2 cherry opportunities done. And
so he blew him out.
He watched me. And then so when I popped up my head, he saw me, and then
he was gone.
Done, and I was just like, this sucks. Second day, nothing all day. And I'm like, oh, that was my shots. And I just blew them. Right. I got a full week. We went 20 something miles away. We found another buck feeding in this bowl. And we're like, okay, I'm going to put a stalk on that night. Like, nope, it's too late. We don't have time. Let's watch him, mark him, come back the next morning. We came back the next morning. He was within 200 yards where we saw him the night before. It's like, oh, this is going. Stalked in 30 yards from him. No wind. So you kind of want some wind, because then you have a directional scent thing and you have noise coverage. So we got 30 yards from him, just about to get into a clear shot angle. My guide steps on a bunch of dry leaves. Deer blows out. Like, oh, here we go. And so my guys are about 2 miles away. They're on a ridge top. They're like, hey, that deer just blew out. And they're like, hold on. He's going around, and he went about 1,000 yards around this valley because he heard us, didn't see us or smell us. That's the only thing that saved us.
Okay.
So we ran up the valley and we're watching him, and he's like running with his mouth open, like getting the heck out of there. He beds down under this tree, and we're like, ooh, game's back on. Like, because he's 500 yards across this valley, but we could see him plain as day. Like, he's right there. So we walk around a mile around the back end of him and get downwind of him. We mark him off this one aspen tree that had these like yellow tops. So when we got in, we're like, okay, we're going to do this. Anyway, long story short, we creep in, and you can't see much. So you're creeping like a micro step, and then you're just glassing, trying to find something micro step. Because we know we have to be within 50 yards of him. Like he could feel us at this distance,
but you're not sure where he is right now.
But you're not sure where he is.
Okay.
And so you're just walking it, and you're looking under every little tree. And then finally at like 40 yards, the guy looks at me. He's like, got him. So we were on our radios. 3 taps means I see him. I heard tap, tap, tap. And I'm like, oh crap. And he's like, does this. And so just the tip, like 2 inches of his antler is sticking out of the grass, and he sees him. So once you get eyes on, at least there's a play, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to do the angles. Like, how do we sneak in on him with all these bushes in the way? And so we sneak in, we get to 36 yards, and there's a hole about the size of a grapefruit between me and him that, like, if he stood up, you could shoot. Now the rifle, you're good. Bow, the arc of the arrow, there's too many things that could go wrong. So I'm thinking, like, my strategy was like, I'm just going to hang here and let the deer get up and move one way or the other. And the guide's like, man, there's too many places he could go that if he takes one step, he's out of play. So he starts creeping in. I'm like, and we've already taught, he's like, these deer have like 6 sensibilities if it's 40 yards and in. Like, you don't want to get in closer. He's like, you want to shoot at 40, don't give it a chance. I'm like, we're at 36 and he's going in. And I'm like, this guy's going to blow this deer out of here. There's no way. He creeps for like the next 15 or 20 minutes and gets to what I considered around 20. I'm like, 20 yards is right there. That's your top 10, right?
He's on top of him.
He's on top of him. And so he gets there, and he's like, and there's these 2 trees. They're still closing him out. I'm like, you're going to have to get inside those trees. So you're going to be within 15. And there's nothing between you and the deer to hide behind. Like, how are you?
Jeez.
I'm watching this. My heart's just racing. Like, he's going to blow this
Can you
up.
see him?
I could just see the deer. So I'm watching him through binoculars, 16 power binoculars at 36 yards. And I'm just watching his head move every time something happens.
Can you see your guide?
Yeah, he's right in front of me. He's
okay.
15 yards in front of me. And I'm just like, I'm already chalked it up to, this is the dumbest bonsai move I've ever seen, And so we get there, and finally he's like, come on. He's like, and I'm like, okay, you got in there. There's no way that my 230 pound with a pack and all my stuff, I'm not from, like, there's no way I'm going to be able to slip in there. So it took like 15 or 20 minutes to move 10 yards. And he told me, he was just like, every time the wind gusts,
take a step.
And it was like, oh, that's so good. He's like, that way, he's not going to smell you, but that of the wind. And you just do it. You'd wait, and you hear it coming. You go, boom, boom, and you'd be up 2 feet. You wait, boom, boom, and you're like, this is going to work. So we got to what I considered about 15 yards.
Oh my gosh.
You're just on top of
him. You're on top of him.
And I could see him, but I still can't get a shot because these 2 limbs. And then he was just like, stand right there and kill him. And it's like another yard. But I had to go through these 2 branches. So he pulls the branch back without it breaking, like a door. And then I had to slip between these 2 branches. And it was like, I got past.
So you had to slide between them to get the shot.
Slide between them. And you're like, it's catching on stuff. And you're like, just don't break a branch. Don't snap a twig. Don't do. And you're just like so super isometrically slow. And I got through it. It was like Mission Impossible. And I stopped. And all I could see was the deer's back of his head. And he just happens to be looking the other way. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm in this dude's bedroom right now. Like, this is checkmate if there was ever a checkmate. But the wind could swirl and he would just blow out of his bed.
Yeah.
And so I look at my guide, and I just point to the back of his neck. And I was like, I'm going to shoot him right there. I was like, he's like, no, don't do that. And I'm like, I got it right here. I can't miss it 15 yards. He's like, just wait. He'll stand up. I'm like, we're screwed. And I sat there for 30 minutes perfectly still. Release was on the arrow, just locked in. And it was like, I would just watch his top of his back, and I would try to like sync my breathing to his. And it was just like, we became like the same thing. And every time his ear would move, and I'm just like, I am sitting on top of you and you don't know this. And it was just, but I started calming down everything. Then after a while, like, the head would move a little bit more, and I'm like, oh,
he's starting to stir.
He's starting to stir.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was just like in slow-mo, I saw his hips rise because their butt goes up first. And I was like, I went whop, and then just pulled it back into that anchor point. You settle in, bubble, do the whole shot process. And it's like that weird, it's like probably like football, like you're in the end zone, a ball is going to you, and you see it right before it hits your hand, and you're like, that's done.
Yeah.
Like it's checkmate. It's done.
Right.
And just like he stood up, and he's still facing away, the pin's on him. And I wanted like this perfect shot for him to turn and show me his vitals like perfectly. But I started to think, I was like, this all happened so fast. Like if he turns this way, he's turned into a tree. He won't turn left. If he turns right and takes one step, he's off the hill and he's down. So he just opened it up just enough. I was sitting there, I'm like, I'm at 15 yards. I know this deer's anatomy like my own. And so I slipped it in front of his hip, behind his last rib, and just, center punched him, took out everything inside. And deer never knew I was there. He ran 60 yards, which took about a second and a half. And the guy, I didn't see him anymore, but the guys on the radio were like, he's down. And it was just like the whole mountain erupted. Like you just hear everyone. I was like, finally, I was like, these things actually can be killed. Like, I can't believe this. So it was awesome. And it was, the coolest part was a guy, Kenny, who was a guide there. Has been there since 1991. And he's like, Bert, we kill 30 or 40 bucks a year. We kill 300 to 400 elk a year here. And we've done it for 30 something years. He's like, that was the top 2 stalk I've ever watched in my life. And he's like, it gave me chills.
That's insane. That's crazy.
And he literally was like tearing up, like this old man. He's like, he goes, that stalk gave me chills. He goes, it was as good as you'll ever see. And I was like, that's cool that I got to be a part. Now it was orchestrated by Austin. Like it was just ninja level stuff. But that he was able to like pull me through it. But what I came away with was like a mountain of knowledge of stuff I learned from it. Like, oh, I know what you can get away with, what you can't. Like, it was kind of like being on a Super Bowl winning team, and then you go, oh, that's how you win. Like, got it. And so I walked away from it like a new sense of accomplishment, but also confidence of like, I know how to, I wouldn't say replicate that, but I learned so much in that 5 years. But that last 10 minutes was like, okay, this put a stamp on how you do this. So that was my MuleDeer story.
What's interesting is that parallels everything we talked about before we ever started talking about hunting. It's the same thing.
Same thing.
That's
why I do it.
It's like you're talking about, like all the stuff led up to that piece at the end, right? But you had to do all the other stuff.
And now if I had to replicate it, I could cut down 50 things I wouldn't do and higher probability shot, and I talked to the guys at Big Chino when I was out in Arizona, and they told me, they'd go, Bert, you'll kill this next hunt. Like, you're getting it. We're watching you as a hunter. We know you're just about to get it. Like, we see you've made all the mistakes, but you have to make all the mistakes.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, you'll be there. And I go, what does that mean? They go, you'll go from a 20% guy, you'll be in the 50s and 60s. It's like, we get guys that they'll almost kill every year because they just figure it out. And you just know what to do. And you're like, oh, but you got to pay your dues. Like, it was 5 weeks in the woods to figure it out. And so now I feel like I have just a better understanding, but there's no shortcut to it.
So if you got to pick now, knowing what you know now, if you got to pick and you went out on those first 3 and you killed every one of them, or you did this and you missed on 4, but you had the most epic stalk there is, which one do you take?
I wouldn't change it. I mean, the first buck was bigger, but I wouldn't have had the experience on that last bit that I learned so much. And because the good part was I still learned on the first 2. I still learned what I should have done and fixed. So I was like, oh, I still won that hunt because I learned from it. You either win or you learn. Right. But I got to learn on 3 now, and they're all different scenarios. And I go, oh, because now if you ran the playback, I'd probably go 100% on those 3 now that I know. But going into it's like, okay, I'm that much better for next year. And now, of course, the addictive property of it goes, I just want to do it again.
Now you have to go on another MuleDeer hunt next year, right?
Like literally, I was like, finally. And I looked at my guide. He's like, it's the greatest thing ever, isn't it? I was like, I would do this again right now. If you said there's another stalk to go on, I would go right now and go do this again.
So is it better than elk? Like now that you've done it, I know you've done a number of elk hunts.
I like elk. Elk is more action. You don't have to be as stealthy. It's more work. It's a more fast pace. It's like long distance precision shooting versus like close quarter combat. You know, it's like
they're different. They're different.
Yeah, elk, you don't have to be as noisy, but you better cover a lot more territory and less like more fast paced. This is like very painstaking, almost to the point where you could think too much.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just a different animal. But some guys I know don't care anything about mule deer because they just love the fast pace and the ruggedness of elk. And then some guys are like, you put me on a mule deer, I'm the happiest because it's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, hey man, I like both of them. Like, you know, do you love a great steak or do you love great barbecue? I don't know. Both. Yes. Sounds great. Like one's flash cooked, one's cooked for 14 hours. Yes. Which one are we doing today?
Sounds good.
I'll do that one. You know? So I have to go back, but it's one of those things when you, as everything, when you finally have success in something, that's when that like last bit of addictive, like, oh, I'm not a guy that's like, once I've got it, it's like, oh, cool, I'll never do that again.
Right.
So, no, I have to ride that ride again.
Yeah.
I have to ride it. Well,
maybe someday when you're the pro mule deer hunter, I'll get to go out and cut my teeth on it.
I pray that you can, man. It's so fun. It's so ridiculously fun. Yeah. Elk is awesome because they're just so big and they're just like, you go up to your elk. I mean, I killed my elk last year at 6 yards. With a bow.
Yeah.
And it was like,
I'm looking forward to that next fall.
Oh,
I can't wait.
You'll love it. It's just so hard. I mean, right now is the time, and you know, we're in mid-September, bulls are bugling, and everybody, all my buddies are posting all these great pictures of elk. I'm like, oh man.
You're not going out elk hunting this year?
Not this year.
Yeah.
We'll try to do it again next year though.
Well, maybe we can go together.
That'd be fun.
That would be a blast.
I actually got a call from a guy 2 days ago. He was like, you want to go into a trophy unit in New Mexico? And I'm like, when? He's like, tomorrow. And I'm like, sounds amazing, but guess what? I have stuff to do. Like, you know, it's one of those things that just opened up the last minute.
Yeah.
I'd love to be in a place where I could just, I'll be on a plane, but
maybe in 10 years, right?
Maybe so.
Yeah. Well, I know you got someplace to go. Thank you so much for coming by, brother.
Thank you.
I appreciate all your mentorship and everything that you're like teaching me and just being available. It means a lot to me.
Likewise. It's been super fun. I'm big shout out to Tyler Renew for hooking us up.
Yeah.
And
Tyler's a great guy.
Yeah, it's been fun. And I'm probably be scratching for some mentorship from you. It's you have it figured out, but thank you for having me on the show. Thanks for getting me to hang out. It's
been a pleasure. And I really appreciate your friendship a lot.
Likewise.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, brother.
All right, man.
Thanks. That's fun.